Yes, if you'd give the review of the letter 6, which is the lover.
Okay, letter 6, the lover, um, is the since it's the number 6, it's going to be an examination of the number 6. It also brings in the vow of chastity and adds that to the vow of poverty and the vow of obedience. So the vow of chastity is represented by the lover. The vow of poverty is represented by the Pope, the Hierophant card, 5. And the vow of obedience is expressed in the Emperor card, the letter 4. So that's the summation. The obedience of poverty together yield chastity. So that there's a dynamic there. And he goes on, and I'm really going to try to just skip over this as lightly as possible. He does a little bit of numerology with the number 6, reducing it to 3 and 3, which becomes 1 and 1, which becomes 2, as the two lovers. The two lovers are depicted on the card as there's 3 figures. One woman has an impudent face, and she is touching the young man in the middle on his shoulder. The other young lady on his flanking his other side is pointing to his heart, not grabbing him, but pointing to his heart. And above them is the cherub shooting the arrow towards his shoulder, from a radiant sun, a sun that radiates with blue, red, and yellow rays. And that is all pointed out with the colors. That was all brought up. So that's why I sent out the color image. The arrow of fire. Cupid is the arrow of fire, the flame of eternal love. Then he unpacks the meaning of to love our neighbors as ourselves, as us working in the field of egocentricity as an existential fact. So that he goes on with that extensively. And then love as substance and intensity, which is radiated. So that relates to the sun image in the card, the radiance of love, which flames into us individually, in one-on-one through the arrow of love, which pierces the heart. Goes on to talk about twin souls a little bit, which I find very interesting. Um, the Adam and Eve, the twin souls. Then he just basically shoots down Freud. He just goes ahead and takes on head on Freud, Marx, and Adler. Their various homosexualis, homo economicus, and homo potestatis. We'll go into that. And he roots for Jung's homo religiosus. So blah. The depth psychology of Jung is very important to this whole letter, by the way. It's very important. It's pivotal to a lot of the conclusions that Tomberg is coming to here. He's clearly allied with Jung. So Jung adds the layers. He adds so much dimension to depth psychology, space time, heredity and reincarnation, collective and individual consciousness, the past which continues to live, and nothing dies in the psychic domain. So the essential history of mankind is what he really appreciates Jung as basically championing the essential history of mankind, as opposed to we'll get into that later. Then he goes into ecstasy, as the different avenues. Ecstasy is moving inward into the depths. Ecstasy is moving upward towards the sublime, the mystical movement of the macrocosmic is ecstasy. The mystical movement of microcosmic, which is the Hermetic path, is ecstasy. He distinguishes between the Pythagorean and the Hermetic paths there. There's a lot in this, a lot to deal with. Then he goes into, I'll jump ahead now to the paradise being the unity of the macrocosmic solar sphere and the microcosmic solar layer. So he's going on into, then he goes on to unpacking the temptation. He also has brought up the hexagram. So the hexagram is very important. The seal of Solomon, that is the motif. That is the sacred geometry to keep in mind the entire time you're reading this letter 6. It's very helpful. I found myself drawing the hexagram several times and putting at the points of the star his various points. And then you see the mirroring, the as above, so below. You get to see it visually. It's very helpful. Um, he goes and he unpacks the fall, the temptation, and talks about the horizontal serpent. And this to me is one of the most interesting parts of Tomberg's teachings here is he goes extensively into this idea of the horizontal serpent being biological and historical evolution on the horizontal axis as opposed to vertical revelation from above. And so he goes on into that. And I don't want to go in particularly that because it just gets, we can unpack that as we go along. So where am I here? So let me see. Um, the birth of doubt. That's very interesting. He goes into the birth of doubt, which is where Eve, is tempted by the serpent to taste of the apple. Faith, he describes doubt as a twofold inspiration and faith as a single inspiration. And that disobedience is rooted there. Disobedience, denying faith is the first act of disobedience. And there's a ripeness for experience, which is a greediness and a hunger for experience, which is the opposite of poverty. Goes on to grace being equal to chastity, and then talks about, I really love this maxim though that comes up here. This maximum is to dare, to will, to be silent, and to know. And he connects that to the gospel. Ask, and the door shall be opened unto you. That gospel. Symbolism he unpacks as depth is ecstasy, the microcosmic ecstasy. Height is ecstasy, and then breadth. The height, depth, and breadth. The breadth represents the universal in space and in time. It's tradition. So the church represents all of these in the outer world. It represents the profound and the sublime in the outer world. The Hermetic path is within the church and represents its depth and height. Then he goes into the law of Torah and uses the seal of Solomon to express the law of Torah. And a wonderful quote: "Law is the child of paradise and the temptation." That is a lovely statement there. Goes on to describe extensively the desert wilderness experience of Jesus, encountering the prince of this world. The prince of this world represents the promise of freedom made by the serpent. Okay, and this is what Jesus is contending with in the desert. Antichrist, the idea of Antichrist being an egregore, the product created from below of biological and historical evolution without grace. That is what he defines as the Antichrist. It is something which it's a phantom created by the whole of humankind. It is not some individual being incarnated to come and mess us all up. It is not that. That is actually a gross simplification of the Antichrist. Materialistic science, he goes on to talk about that. He basically is taking the idea of Jungian's idea of the shadow, and he runs with it. Okay, he's taking the idea of the shadow, which is, there's the rightful church, the shadow church, rightful government, the shadow government. And he goes on, he runs with that. So what he's saying is, to see rightly, one has to look rightly. And to that, he goes on to describe the difference between divine law and how that is opposed to serpent evolution. Again, divine law coming down through revelation, and serpent evolution representing biological or evolutionary law, which is presented through materialistic sciences. So evolution giving way to grace. The Son of Man represents the vertical Trinitarian grace, which meets the spirit of horizontal evolution. That's once again the hexagram, the seal of Solomon. You can keep visualizing that. It works very well. The three temptations are the will to power, the groping trial and the gross into the subtle trial. So we go into those. A lot to unpack here. And that's where I end up. So the will to power is a temptation of obedience, and the temptation against chastity is the groping trial. Yeah, I bet it is. Anyway, and the biological evolution of the serpent, the gross into the subtle, is the trial of against poverty. So that's the summation I have. Sorry if it's incoherent. I do the best I can, and I just finished reading the chapter.
Alice, could you explain a little further the gross, the difference on the poverty, that part, the gross into the subtle? Could you unpack that a little more?
The idea of turning the gross into the subtle is the summation of the idea of evolution from below.
Okay.
Is the idea that we can forge a reality and create freedom through turning the gross into the subtle, such as making our own synthetic foods. That's turning the stones into bread. And of course, take that further, take that into cloning, take that into all of the impulses of transhumanism. That's what's represented today. The idea that disease can be solved by vaccines, disease as opposed to being solved by spiritual work, disease being essentially a biological problem, a problem of germ theory, as opposed to, I would say, terrain theory, terrain theory takes in your whole environment and looks at your being as as spirit, mind, and body all connected. So there's a good example: holistic medicine versus allopathic medicine. That's a very good example. Allopathic medicine representing the way of the serpent, the way of the horizontal. Not to say that allopathic medicine is all bad, but natural medicine, holistic medicine, tends to take in the whole being and tends to be more open to revelation. Say you're taking Reiki therapy. That is a vertical therapy. That is a vertical inspired therapy, as opposed to taking just pharmacy drugs. Do you see what I'm saying? Getting at? Anyway, that's all I'll say about that.
There's this new, in fact, a new bestseller about CRISPR. The code breaker. So what do people think about that?
Can of worms, Dori.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think that's a good description.
Yeah. Do you all know about CRISPR?
It's like it's helping sickle cell anemia, but
yeah. Can you do a little synopsis on what CRISPR that is?
It's a tool that can edit DNA.
It's gene therapy.
It's gene therapy.
It's available to anyone. It's available to anyone to use.
That's nice.
Well, really?
if you decide to avail yourself of it, yeah. For instance,
I mean, it's available to any professional, to any scientist, that kind of thing. I'm not talking about us as individuals, but
it is available to us in the form of this vaccine that they have out there. By the way, this vaccine is a form of DNA of gene therapy. It's a gene therapeutic experimental drug. So that now is being injected into the entire group of humanity right now.
And it is not in the definition of a vaccine.
Right.
What do you mean by that, honey?
I mean, the definition of a vaccine, if you go and look at it, at the definition, which says whatever they put into your body is to help prevent down the road of whatever they're saying. In this, it's the virus, the COVID virus. This is not doing this. It is gene therapy. And I mean, it's written in the research time and time again, but nobody's paying attention to it, seems.
I think that's not something that we have enough knowledge to have a discussion of here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think that's true. But that was,
It's a can of worms.
it's a can
Yeah.
of worms. Well, and I guess it's like the atom bomb, it can give power, but it can also destroy.
Exactly.
Well, I was also thinking of synthetic foods, because we've changed our food in America. So, genetically it's been changed. When I spent a month in Italy, where they're still growing actual wheat that God made, and everything has not been bio changed in Italy. It's amazing when you look at the weight problem in our country versus, I know people in Europe walk more, but the food is more pure. The difference of how their body is using that food is the way it was when we had it before bio changes. So synthetic doesn't necessarily mean better.
Yeah, no. Europe was in the vanguard of denying immediately all GMO, all genetically modified foods. They were at the vanguard of that. The United States just embraced it.
Well, yeah, and I think that, when you get to the roots of the weight problem, it's not that, I think we're just eating food that no longer is digested the way God made it, to be digested. So we're having other problems, which that's what I noticed as you're talking about this chapter. It's a lot about that. What's the consciousness? Where are you going with your consciousness?
Yeah, this chapter is really packed with connections to what's going on right now. I mean, the section on the temptations, the will to power, the groping trial, and the gross into the subtle. So the groping trial is interesting too, because what he's saying that the biological evolutionary theory is that evolution happens by trial and error, that it's just this groping sort of, rather than by divine design. Okay. Divine design is ruled out. Oh no, evolution is simply by this groping trial and error of nature. And what he points out is that that's the limited serpent evolution. That's the wily serpent's limited intellect and limited will to power, is represented by materialistic science in just brute, plain old biological evolution, without allowing for the element of divine inspiration literally in breath, and divine revelation. And that's why he goes and attacks Marx. He immediately just attacks Marx and Freud and Adler. Now, I don't know about you, but I always instinctively detested their philosophies, the way that they thought. Detested it. The idea that Freud's idea that we're homosexualis, meaning someone who's just driven by libido and by these crude, impulses, always repelled me. The idea of Marx that we are completely ruled by the socioeconomic systems, and Adler with the will to power, the Nietzschean, the idea of the Superman, the Uberman, the will to power. All of those ideas repelled me from the very beginning. And that's how I knew that I was basically going to be a hermeticist, a Christian hermeticist. Hello, who's saying? I heard something.
I want to go back to the evolution just for a minute and to see if there's this distinction between evolution or not evolution, because what I am hearing or what I'm reading with this is that the Antichrist, the egregore, that is evolution without grace. So that says to me that there is evolution with grace, because I don't think evolution in and of itself is the egregore, but I think it's that key of evolution without grace.
Right. I mean, the idea of, the idea of recurrence and the hero's journey, which is that we come from source and we're returning back to source. That envelops the spiritual vertical dimension of evolution. But that is excluded on the horizontal plane by the materialistic scientists. That's excluded. We talk about the hero's journey and they'd be like, well, whatever.
Is it also something to do with the hexagram is in fact two triangles placed, inverted and placed on top of each other, or whatever. And this means you have got two sets of three. And of course, the lover is all about the two becoming one. And I think the three is the body, mind, and spirit, isn't it, that each have. And if it is functioning positively, then you have two triangles interacting in a way which actually makes a bigger and more wonderful thing, which is presumably why God created the world in the first place, because he wanted not simply to be one great big monad, no matter how beautifully working, but he wanted to be working genuinely with the other. But of course, I've just talked about the hexagram working positively, but if it's working negatively, presumably it can't help being two, because that simply is the way creation is created. But it can be the two halves of the hexagram seeking to control each other. And so you can have a sort of shadow oneness, but that is the shadow oneness of totalitarianism, in which one takes over the other and doesn't respect or help its own proper individuality, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That very profound analysis of the hexagram and the numerology. That is very essential to what you said. And again, when I look at the hexagram, I think of, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Mother, Daughter, Holy Soul, which he gets into later. But this idea of incarnation, this movement downward from above, but inspiration from above also, which grounds and feeds the base. So that's such an important symbol. And the reflection, as you point out, not only is there, if you fold it horizontally, you get as above, so below. And if you fold it vertically, so interesting what you're pointing out is that the dualism becoming monism or becoming one, can be false, or and as can the as above, so below be false. But that symmetry of this image where it can be folded from its sixness to its threeness to its two-ness to its oneness is that's the power of the symbol. Extremely powerful. Thank you for unpacking that.
He has spoken of this before, and you touched on this, Alice, as well. But this was just such a profound way that he put it this time. He talked about the formula of the synthesis of effort and grace. And that is this principle of work and receptivity, which is the seeking, the asking, and the knocking at the door, but waiting for it to be opened, not the grasping. And
yes, that, and the grasp and the waiting is where you're waiting for grace to infill. That's the virtue of chastity. because the unchaste is to grasp and try to grab the experience, to take it by force is unchaste, such as the woman in the card who comes up and puts her hand on the young man's shoulder and says, I have found you. I'm going to take you now. I want you. Yeah, the sensuality of the lover who comes and says, I want to possess you. So I thought that was a very interesting thing, because he distinguishes between he distinguishes this in theology, John, as you may have noticed, where he talks about the idea of I forget the name of the philosopher, Pelagian, or I forget who is everything. Pelagianism, which is all about everything is effort, everything is work, everything is effort, everything that you do spiritually has to be an effort. And the Lutheran point of view, which is everything is grace, everything that your work doesn't matter, it's grace. The Hermetic path is that the work is very important. The work is what brings on, which is what invokes grace, and that they're a synthesis together. Excuse me. Hello.
Alice had to take a call because she has, I'm not sure if it's a call every week at 10, but since she was on the 9 to 10 schedule, that's the reason, but maybe it won't be every week. One thing I would love what you all thought about this. When he was talking about phantoms, just this idea of phantoms, and he described it as this electromagnetic nature which resists decomposition. And that is what is in these haunted houses.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. What did you all think?
Well, it sort of goes along to me. I was thinking about the ascended ones, like what, we have life beyond this life. And so it sort of made sense to me. I just never heard it put that way before. And so I'm thinking, if we do have ascended beings and we become ascended beings, and why wouldn't some of the beings just be, and then he brought up also, he said good and evil. I mean, good or evil also is an evolution. So there must be good and evil also in with the idea of phantom, ascended beings of positive light, phantoms of the shadow light.
Because I'm with you, because I didn't get the idea that this phantom being that resists decomposition, that's necessarily good or evil. It's just this fact. And maybe it's this fact of this evolution.
Don't you think that haunting can be a bit more complicated? Because a lot of haunting is simply place memories, which is simply, for some reason, an image or a sound or a feeling, or has been, as it were, left as a photograph for some reason, which gradually fades away. And it's no use trying to talk to it or get it to respond, because it is simply a photograph, and you can't talk to a photograph and expect it to speak back to you. But then what happens when you do get hauntings that do respond positively or negatively? I'm just saying that, I mean, that it is a very complex phenomena. I also think quite a common one these days are wandering souls who have died, but they have just got lost on the right way forward. Not because they're terribly, terribly evil and this is part of their punishment, but simply they've lost their way and they need gently sort of redirecting. And they, I think, have got a genuine personality, as it were. So I think hauntings, there are many different sorts of hauntings.
I think you started it well, John, because she, what Dori was talking about was when she used the word decomposition. So when you talked about memories and, like that being part of maybe uncompleted business or incomplete business, like they didn't let go. They didn't let, they didn't either make peace or whatever. within their being. So, you know, something like decomposition could be something like that as well, meaning that there was a reason they're still walking here. Good or evil doesn't matter. It's a matter of what unfinished business maybe they have to be in a haunted type of position. Because you used a couple of different things.
I know someone who works with that. And interestingly enough, his name is Eric Dowsett. What does he do? Dowsing.
So
And
what's the
he has-
definition of dowsing?
What's that?
What's the definition of dowsing?
Are you not familiar with dowsing?
Well, I probably am. I just never heard that word. I might know what it is, but I just. never
Oh,
heard the word.
well, I don't have a definition for it. Sorry, a quick definition. But dowsing is working with different energies. It might
Okay.
be, and it's usually using a tool that helps to direct you to where that energy is. It might be like the dowsing rods you've heard of people using to find water, because
Right.
water carries a lot of energy. Well, you can also do that with any other kind of energy.
Yeah, I watch them on TV. So I watched all the equipment they use to, you know, get the magnetic field or to feel that something's in the air.
Right. So if you follow that theory of magnetic energy, we all have magnetic energy around us too. So really you can douse anything. And that's what Eric Dowsett does. The interesting thing is, John, going back to what you were saying, and that's his theory too, is that there are some souls that simply haven't been able to find their way, let's say, out of this realm, okay? And they're kind of stuck here. And he has worked with that to help them, as he says, cross over.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's,
And they're negative, I think they call them entities that, I mean, I took a course and I've actually done a fair amount of energy work. And it was enough for me to know that I didn't want to be involved with any of that negative side of it. Because, I mean, some of that energy could get stuck with you and I don't want that.
Mhm.
yeah, Michelle, when we moved, we are out in the country, and when we moved here, we hired a dowser to douse for water. It was a little bit difficult in our area, and she's commonly called the water witch. And she came out, and exactly where she did, she had her sticks and her well, she had all kinds of equipment, but they were all just sticks basically. And she came and when she found it, she then could tell us exactly how far down we had to dig. And it was exactly what she said. It was 600 feet. And it was exactly, because otherwise we would have had a very expensive campground if we could not have gotten water here. And so that's, an example of it anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, but we're energy. All right, let me ask you all another thing. He's referring here to seeking experience is the beginning and the principle of greed.
I remember that, Dori. Can you just say what page you're on? I think it helps.
I made notes from it, so
okay.
I realize I can't even do that. But it's this whole idea, and he was. I'll tell you how it was in the context of it is to seek experiences or to make experiments. But then I'll tell you, it's in the context of doubt.
Mm-hmm.
But to think of scientists, if they have that certainty, I would think necessarily there is doubt there. So this whole idea of and then he goes on to say that is the basis of unchastity.
Do you think he's trying to say live in the present moment and don't go forward and don't go backward?
I don't know, because he says to seek experiences or to make experiments based on doubt. Now he's saying based on doubt is unchastity. And he described the doubt. This was in reference to that listening to the serpent is what gave rise to doubt. for Eve. That was the beginning of doubt. And so that was listening on the horizontal. And maybe that's a connection is if instead we are listening on the vertical, if the scientist is listening on the vertical, listening to the greater good, listening to God, versus maybe seeking economic gain, seeking prestige, maybe there, maybe that has something. I'm just speculating.
It does sound a little bit like the ego as opposed to the divinity.
Uh-huh.
And I think it was, good.
I was just going to say it could be both. It could be on both of those lines, the vertical and the horizontal. And go back to CRISPR as an example. Depending on how people use that could be on a very vertical line.
Yeah. Well, and to give someone who has sickle cell anemia to not have it anymore, or to be able to move beyond it, that is very positive for that person, for that person's family, for that person's universe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all we know now, it sounds like to me, and I don't know a thing about CRISPR, but do we know the long term of this? Is it a quick fix, or should we wait and see what happens to these people who take it, who had
Sickle cell.
Yeah, well, that's just one example. The sickle cell is just one example.
Yeah.
It's the ability to change everything. I don't think that it's not like a medicine with long-term effects or side effects. It's literally changing that DNA. But the scary part is, how can that be used on a vertical line for things that aren't done with love, aren't done for the good of all?
Yeah.
Well, right now with the pandemic, for example, that town in New Mexico that they just put a bunch of buses of people, of immigrants coming there, they said just to test them every day or every week for the time that they're in this little tiny city or little tiny town is going to cost $600,000 a year just to manage the COVID in that town. And so, what I see there is, why can't, pharmaceutical companies make a lot of money because they do the research that creates this stuff. So at some point, when do you, like you just said about love, when does the pharmaceutical companies give this town of 2,000 people they're now taking in, they're being basically all deported there. And now the amount of COVID testing is more than their budget for the whole town for the year. So at what point is it about economy, which is the unchaste, doing it out of greed, versus doing it out of love, which is we have to now, serve these people that are now here, and so and I saw that, and I think it was Einstein too, that, realized from all his science that God existed, which, that was pretty interesting too. So I think with science, we can see a lot of that between greed and love.
And if we were made in the image of God, then it is a natural thing. That creativity and that curiosity is a natural thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what God is. Only God is doing it all with love.
I think that's a key
Maybe
point.
part of that fall, because this whole chapter was about love, and maybe part of that fall is that it's where we have lost that connection to love.
Mhm.
And if we go back to the first of this chapter where they were talking about the different kinds of love, I found that very interesting. I find it very interesting with what's going on in our society now. And I find it very interesting in looking at some people. I'd have to go back and read the, how what they exactly call those different loves. But, someone like a Mother Teresa. And I just saw recently that there's a movie coming out about Audrey Hepburn. And one of the things they said in the movie is, as gorgeous as she was, and as as much of she wanted to be a dancer, but she ended up being the movie star. She was very insecure and never found the love that she wanted in life. Now that would be the you know, the love with a man that she wanted in life. But she I don't know what country it was in, because this was just about a little quick thing about the movie, but she did, like, sort of like Mother Teresa. She gave her love to children and helping children. And that's how so I find it that some people like a Mother Teresa and like a Audrey Hepburn have that kind of love that goes out expands to everybody. Okay. I think is what I would say. And in society now, I feel like that so many can't see beyond themselves and maybe their immediate family. There's no outpouring of love in community. Am I off base with that?
No, that's the me generation. That's the definition of the me generation.
The way that I understood this whole question of, bad curiosity rather than good accepting tradition, was that I think he sees the negative aspect of curiosity when you are sitting down saying, I am myself the great power who is going to understand this and make it into something worthwhile. And I think he says, if you behave that way, relying on yourself and your old power, no matter how well intentioned you may be, that is likely to land you in the soup. Whereas the accepting grace tradition isn't simply bindy saying, oh yes, it's written in the Bible, so it must be true. It's rather saying, look, we're living in a world which has got its own structures and laws. We are able to think about it, and gracious me, our thoughts about the world actually seem to relate to the world. Science has shown that we can understand a lot and manipulate it a lot. And that creates a tremendous, why is this so? Why is the electromagnetic whiz in our brains, why does it actually connect with what is happening outside? And I think this is why Einstein and folk are saying we must be responding, because a groping sort of evolution might well get things done, but will it be able to get to a stage when we can simply from the groping aspect understand what's happening and change it a little? And I think this is where he is saying we must realize that God is there, and the macrocosm wouldn't relate to the microcosm in the way that it does unless there was a beyond which was doing a certain amount of integrating. That was my understanding anyhow.
Yeah.
The way you phrased the question, Dori, I don't know how you phrased it, but what came to me was striving. In the Bible, they talk about, striving, which is all about me versus, and then versus not striving. And when Alice was doing her summary, the definition between unchaste and chastity was unchaste was taking it by force, sort of what John was just saying, taking it by force versus waiting for the other, waiting for or aligning with divine providence, which is the love part. And so and they talked a section about force too. What's the sense of force? So my feeling was in relation to the Bible was just that essence of do not strive. If we can partner with the divine, how much more can we actually discover or be?
Well, and he describes at the end of this chapter, he says, Christianity is the good news that there is another way other than this evolutionary groping. What a great term for that. And that's, I think, what John was describing. I mean, we're just leaving? We're leaving things on the table. We're on our own. We just can't do it. So to have this good news, that is good news.
I was taken by the I don't know if you just discussed this while I was absent, but the idea of John, when Jesus was baptized in the Jordan, what an amazing event that was. That it was a sacrament of baptism and confirmation of grace. They both coalesced in that moment, and they were the fullness of divine, the pleroma, the fullness of the divine came down with, at the same time, the kenoma, the emptiness. They both descended in the baptism act on Jesus in the Jordan. So then that's why Jesus had to go right into the wilderness, because he had experienced the fullness of the divine, but he immediately had to go out into the kenoma. He had to go out into the empty space of the wilderness. I never realized that idea of that both here descended into Jesus's being, and he had to contend with both, or he had to use one to do battle with the other. But they are that duality again, as John was pointing out. We have that duality always. The withdrawal of God, the void. So here's the withdrawal of God again at the very act of the sacrament of the first baptism. The void is there, and that is true of every son of God, every son of man and daughter of God who is baptized. They are automatically given, they are given through grace the pleroma and the kenoma at the same time, which is what gives them free will and the free ability to choose. They have the ability to choose between, they get to make choices, and they get to either accept grace coming in, or they get to close off grace if they want to do that as they move through life. Thank you.
You know, and I had this question, and that was, you were just talking about that in Miller's page 140, that this one is. And this is just packed in this, like in this sentence. And this is at I guess the next to the last paragraph. And I'm just going to read this out. This is just what Alice was talking about, and talking about the baptism in the Jordan is the prototype of the holy sacrament of baptism. So is the meeting of grace with the quintessence of the evolutionary impulse since the fall, the prototype of the holy sacrament of confirmation. All of it right there.
Yeah.
And it goes on to say, for it is then that grace from above is firmly established against the law from below. It is then that evolution gave way to grace, right there in the Jordan, right there. And you have both sacraments right there.
Yeah. Again, that's the seal of Solomon, and it's the quintessence of evolution. That is also, he refers at some points to the virgin essence of nature. Nature is virginal, and there's a sense of man, even despite the fall. There's a layer of man. There's a layer of mankind that is virginal, that responds to this call from grace. It responds to this vertical greeting, an invitation from on high to evolve that way. I always feel so sorry for people that like claim to be atheist, or who refuse to acknowledge anything from the spiritual realms, any kind of entrance into their being. They just close themselves off. I feel that that's such a terrible existence. But all you can do is try to make your way in by piercing them with the arrow of love. So the arrow of divine love is what pierces the armor of anybody to get to their quintessence. That to me is what I do as a Christian. That's what I'm to do. But love is always expressed one-on-one. It's never abstract. We don't love God in the abstract. We love individuals one-on-one. It's Mark out on the streets dealing with, each homeless young man that he encounters. He is taking his armor of love. He's wearing it, and he also has the spear of love. He can pierce their armor, which I'm sure they're very armored, emotionally, psychically, spiritually armored. But he can pierce it with love, and he has to be able to believe that, and he has to overcome doubt. You have to have that faith, that single-minded faith that allows you to move on with just love as your only power, your only weapon.
You just shared the good news, which is how the chapter ends.
Mhm. Yeah. All right, another question I have. This is on page 143. This is the second full paragraph, right? Sort of in the middle of that. And it's referring to the God of Israel. The Holy One of Israel was the revealed God. See, there it's gifted. We can't take the revealed God having, and here's my question, having no other relationship with the human will than that of the law imposed upon it. What the law imposed, has no other relationship except that of the law imposed upon it. Capital L, law. What?
That's the world of the word, the world of the word.
The word, capital W.
Yeah. And that's being in alignment with the macrocosmic experience of the cosmic law, and making that come into alignment with the microcosmic being of your quintessence. And it's the principle of spiritual fornication, very important. The word fornication is a very, when you hear it, you just think of sexual fornication. No. Fornication is on many levels. And this is very interesting because it talks about spiritual fornication is the preference of the subconscious to the conscious and superconscious, of instinct to the law, and of the world of the serpent to the world of the word. Very important. So if you choose to go and just disincarnate from your body and give up your consciousness to like a drug, okay? If you disincarnate, that is spiritual fornication, because you're preferring the subconscious to the conscious. You're allowing your subconscious world to take over your consciousness, which is your divine gift. So if you want to reflect on what spiritual fornication is, it's very rich. That's a very rich and complicated idea. But that's where we descend into whenever we deny the world of the word and the divine law.
Seems that a lot of these, that within these temptations, there is the impulse to just succumb to the path of least resistance. It's kind of what, in the context of this conversation and reflection on the reading, that succumbing to the path of least resistance seems to be tied up in these temptations, and to just be swept away, go with the flow, whatever your instinct is, rather than hold fast, maybe. Not that eventually we're not going to go where the river takes us, but if the path of least resistance is what made the river crooked, it might be worthwhile to at least hold on long enough to see where it's going before we just let go and see where it takes us, which is what a lot of this groping talk seems to lead me to think about. And I don't know, that's what's come to me out of this conversation. I don't know if that's helpful for anyone, but holding on momentarily, long enough at least to get our bearings in the midst of this madness, seems to be what I feel called to.
Yeah, that's that's the virtue of effort and perseverance. And what you're saying, the path of least resistance is exactly that. It's that's sloth, that's laziness. They are real. Those vices are real. They are very real, and they are counterposed by the virtues of effort, the virtues of perseverance, the virtues of holding, learning how to hold the line, hold your peace, hold your faith.
Well,
Well,
just bringing up these ideas of virtues and sins, I wonder how that might relate to this idea of egregore as well, which we touched on briefly while you stepped away. But it's this egregore idea is interesting to me, in that it seems that our intention, our thoughts, those things take on a life beyond. That they don't just float away into the ether, apparently, but somehow either hold together for the common good, or hold together, somehow maybe opposed to what we would imagine as the common good. But the idea of the church as an egregore in some sense, and also these gods, Moloch or Baal, or some of the things that he's alluded to here,
or
being
Hollywood.
egregores as well.
Hollywood's an egregore.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. Worth some thought, I suppose.
Mhm.
Yeah, the world of egregores is just fascinating, because of course that is the world of phantoms, and that would be what the Hindus would call Maya. That's the field of illusions.
Alice, when you left, we talked about the whole idea of his definition of phantom, of that electromagnetic nature which resists decomposition. And and we talked among ourselves. And have you heard, do you know experiences of phantoms that they resist decomposition? The body's resistant.
Yes, that's what cyborgism is. That is what cloning is. This is what trying to create immortality on the horizontal plane is all about, done through electromagnetic force, which is a force of nature that you can harness with your will to power. And you can create things with it. You can create Frankenstein. Look at Frankenstein. Frankenstein was animated with electrical thunderbolts and lightning and thunderbolts, right? That's a very good example of the phantom, which does not decay. What was Frankenstein an allegory? It was an allegory of trying to stitch together a form of immortality, of living forever, through your own will to power your own will, right? And look at that. Frankenstein at least points it out as evil, but the transhumanists are trying to present the same thing. You can live forever. Maybe you're going to be frozen for a while and sent off into space to another planet. That's another form of this, okay? That is the idea of trying to exist, and that is merely a phantom existence. It's an illusion. Fountain of youth, think how many of those there are. How many people engage in that, myself included? Always looking for a fountain of youth. I'm going to try carbon 60 now. I'm always trying something to try to extend my life. That is a succumbing to a temptation. That is succumbing to some temptation to try to keep my body alive at all costs. Our culture has a fetish about its bodies, about the physical body, doesn't it? I think this whole fear of the virus is also plugging right into our really basic fear in this culture of death. We have such a fear of death, such a fear of death. We will do anything. We will give up any freedom. We will succumb in any way we have to keep our body alive. That's the electromagnetic phantom that the serpent offers us.
No, is it to keep the body alive, or is it to keep it thriving, to be well? I don't care how long I live. I just want to live well and then die, immediately. So yeah, it's,
That's a fine line.
yeah.
That's a fine line. And this is why our incarnation is so interesting to me. That seal of Solomon is so important because we are enfleshed spirit. We are enfleshed spirit. But if you forget that we're enfleshed spirit and you think you're only a flesh being, that's when you get in trouble.
Good. Well, I've got after 10:30 now, 10:35. So is this time, is this going to work well for us, you think? Does it? Yeah.
Can I just mention something that Miller said? She said we were created in God's image, which is creative. And I am thinking that this phantom and, Frankenstein and what we're talking about, illusions, that's creative, but it is not a positive creation. It is definitely a man-made negative creation as opposed to God's creation, which is super positive to me. So I think sometimes when we're thinking about scientists, and as Alice was just saying about the fear that's been created, that's definitely negative, but it is scientific, or they're telling us it's scientific. So I think we have to realize there's a fine line, and we have to identify what is positive and what is negative, because there's so much positive creation going out there, just like Miller was telling us about Audrey Hepburn. She focused her creative abilities, and I'm sure her financial abilities, towards the creation of things for children, as opposed to, and that's why I said, I just don't know about this Crispit thing. Is it a positive? Is it not? I don't know. I have no idea.
Honey,
But it's
again, that depends on how it's used.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not the creation itself always. It depends on how that is used and what, maybe even in what inspired the person who created it. But what inspired the person who created CRISPR, if you go in and read it, it was all for good. But that doesn't mean that everybody who's going to use it is going to be using it for good.
Yes.
And I just want to go back to Mark and what he does too. Mark, I mentioned that about Audrey Hepburn and about Mother Teresa, and that's what Mark is doing too. In taking his love outside of himself and outside of his small community to helping all of those people. That's absolutely wonderful. Thank you for doing that, Mark.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And I definitely just want to point out and remind us that this is what we all do within every interaction. We have the opportunity to see the truth in someone and call that truth out, and to remind one another that we are not just the sum total of the things that have happened to us or the things that we have done. Thank the Lord. So this is something that we each have the opportunity to do within every interaction, is to recognize the Christ within the other, recognize the Christ within ourselves, and move toward that unmediated union. I hope that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Mark. That's great advice.
Mm.
That especially helps me right now with my situation with my son. Thank you.
Well, and that's with our spouse. I mean, someone so close to us, to have that Christ attitude just that attitude, that energy out. What a challenge.
Well, you
what a
start
challenge.
with your neighbor. You have to start with your neighbor, the nearest and dearest to you,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I think it also said in the chapter that until we love others, we really can't love ourselves. There was a reflection in that chapter that talked about that, was the loving of others is the test to loving ourselves as well. And I was thinking about that CRISPR, if you think of IVF, the test tube baby, and you think of stem cell research, those are all those researches that have started for goodwill. And like the point is, it depends on how it's being used. So it's helped a lot of, say, for example, infertile couples. But I remember when it first came out and it was a really, is this good or is this not? There was that big aspect about cloning and such.
Good. Well, I think I will go ahead and stop our recording.
Can I just it doesn't have to be recorded. But Michelle, what you just said and what Alice was saying about Frankenstein, also, what was it? Dr. Hyde and what?
Jekyll,
Jekyll and Hyde.
Right. So that kind of goes to that, Michelle. The one was the good doctor, and then he transformed into this evil person.
Mr. Hyde, not Dr. Hyde.
Mr. Hyde. Okay, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Believe it or not, I just saw that movie for the first time about a year ago.
That's a good example of the phantom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the double.
Mm-hmm.
That's an ongoing theme, and that's of course Jung's theme of the double. And each and every one of us works with shadow work. That's what the Jekyll and Hyde story is so great. It's such a great example of that, about what happens if you ignore the shadow side of yourself. Guess what? It becomes an external projection. And you project it out in the world everywhere. And that gets you into all sorts of trouble. We see that all the time. Collectively, as a society, we see that. But this was wonderful, you guys. I'm sorry I missed a few minutes of it too, because what a great conversation.